Now let's go back and talk about what that phrase market value means. So what you need to know is in the blue box, and I know it's a lot of words, but it really makes a lot of sense, common sense, when you break it down and see how it kind of fits into a real life scenario. So what you need to know, long-winded, take a deep breath. It's an estimate of what a property is likely to sell for in an arm's length transaction between a buyer and a seller if the property is on the market for a reasonable period of time when market conditions are unchanged. So let's break that into little pieces. The first part in bold is sort of the most important portion of this definition description. It's an estimate of what the property is likely to sell for. So when you come up with a market value, when you look at the market and you use the market to base your data on and come up with a suggested price, you don't know exactly what that property is going to sell for until it actually sells. So until it's sold, you don't know really if it's going to sell for the market value or not. That's why they use the phrase likely to sell for, because it's just an estimate. So that's the very first phrase in that description. It's an estimate of what the property is likely to sell for. Now that's in an arm's length transaction. What do they mean by arm's length transaction? No previous relationship between the parties, right? It's a business deal and both sides, buyer and seller in this situation, were both trying to get the best deal for themselves and they weren't considering the other party at all. When you have those personal relationships, those personal relationships can actually get in between and can get in the way of you looking out for your own best interest first if you're trying to consider the other party that's in that deal. Okay, so family members, friends, long-term relationships, long-term business relationships, that can all affect the price that you would negotiate and come to between the two of you. Arm's length transactions, all business. I don't care about you, you don't care about me, and we go at it and we try and duke it out and get the best deal for ourselves. Okay, the last bit is if the property is on the market for a reasonable time when that market condition has remained unchanged. And so this is all about getting stable and good data out of your market. So you're going to use previously sold, but you can't go too far back in history because that information isn't relative or relevant to your situation right now. So you've got to only use when that market has been around the same kind of market that it is. So think of the crazy markets that we've had in the last bunch of years. When the market was going really fast, you couldn't use data from a day ago or a week ago or a month ago. You couldn't go back that far. You had to keep it within that short period of time. Some other times in history, we've had the market be super slow, and you could go back a year or 2 years. It's also dependent on the area, right? It's the area that is concerned with that market. You're not going to use solds from Prince George for Surrey. You're going to use Surrey for Surrey. And so you need to look at that Surrey market. And if Surrey market has been stable for a year, then you can go back a year and you can use all kinds of different data and examples from that entire year. But if the Surrey market is changing, if it's moving, then you can only use whatever period of time that it's been unchanged. Okay, so make sure that you're kind of aware of all of those things in that description. This is kind of what happens in real life, right? A seller puts their property up on the market, and the buyer goes to look at it and says, I'm willing to pay this, I'm not willing to pay that. We're going to bargain back and forth. We're each going to duke it out, try and get the best deal that we can, and then we're going to come to some sort of an agreement on what the terms are going to be for that property deal. Okay, so pretty common sense, but you do need to remember it the way it is because that's how you're going to see it in question and answers. The one thing I want to caution about is that market value is not the same thing as the value to owner. So remember we said the value to owner was there's subjective values, right? That was the ceiling price and the floor price. The market value is not related to that. It's not the same thing as that. The value to owner is a subjective value. The market value is based on that market and based on the relationship, the non-relationship, right, arm's length transaction, and those market conditions being unchanged. So market value very different than the value to owner because the value to owner will have some sort of an emotional investment in the values that they're coming up with in their head. There are two elements of market value. The first one is the rights of ownership, and the second one is the physical property in which those rights are vested. So what do you actually own when you purchase this property? What do you actually get for that? And where are those rights related to? What is the property, right? The physical property, what is going on with that physical property of that parcel? Okay, so pretty simple, straightforward stuff for these. Just make sure that you know that definition well. So the market value of a property is best defined as what? So is it a long-term conservative estimate of the value of the property pledged as security for a loan if the property is on the market for a reasonable period of time when the market conditions are unchanged? So that might seem like it's a really good answer choice. It sounds like a definition that we had previously. Let's check number 2 and then we'll decide on which one is the better answer. Is it an estimate of what a property is likely to sell for in an arm's length transaction between a willing, informed, and rational average buyer and seller if the property is on the market for a reasonable period of time and the market conditions are unchanged? And they've thrown a few little extra bits and pieces in there, but that is the definition that we just went over for market value. That is true. Why is this one false? Because that is the definition, the description of lending value. So I said they're going to ask you what one of them is, and they're going to put both of them in your answer choices, and you need to be able to tell them apart because they will do that to you pretty much every time. Which of the following is a key determinant of the value of property? Which one matters for a value of a property? So vendor financing, cash equivalent price, listing or asking price, or the rights of ownership. We just said, what are the two components of that market value? One of them was the rights of ownership. So the rights of ownership and the physical property in which those rights are vested. The physical property that those rights are related to or connected to. That's what the word vested means. Now, what are the legal interests in real estate? It has to do with what the subject of an appraisal is. So what is the subject of an appraisal? All the things that you're trying to value. It is all the legal rights of ownership that are vested, that are included or part of that particular piece of real estate. So all of the different legal interests will contribute to what a property value is. So whether there's airspace, whether there's an easement or restricted covenant on the property, whether there's anything charged to the title, like pending litigation, what kind of ownership it is, whether it's fee simple or so fee simple freehold or leasehold. And a condominium ownership is also referring to the same fee simple ownership as well. All of those different things will be part of what that final number is for any one property. So the value of the legal rights of ownership, those legal interests in real estate, these are estimates, right? And the true subject of the appraisal is all of the different pieces and components. It's not just about the property and the house that's on it. It's all of the other stuff as well as those two things that comes up with that final appraisal amount at the very end of it all. Which of the following might be the subject of a real property appraisal? So hopefully you remember we said airspace rights was definitely one of the things that we would value. So a life insurance policy, no, that has nothing to do with our appraisals. A diamond, very vague. We don't know what the diamond's related to. It could be a diamond from some jewelry, and that has nothing to do with the property's value. So please don't think all of the above for this one. Definitely just those airspace rights for this one. A real estate appraiser would not value which one. So we're going to go one by one like we usually do. An existing rental agreement of a warehouse. Is there value in that? What do you think? If you were to go and look at two different properties, one of them was a warehouse that was leased for a while, and you're looking to invest in this property, you don't want to use it for yourself. So you're looking to invest, and one of those properties was leased for a 10-year term, and the other one wasn't leased. Which one would be of more value to you? The one that was already leased would be, because then you wouldn't have to worry about trying to go out and finding that tenant to occupy that property. So yes, an existing rental agreement for a warehouse. Number two, the right to use airspace at the top of a high-rise office building. Now, a lot of students get confused with this one because they say, well, it's at the top of a high-rise building, so there is no airspace left, so there's no value there. It tells you there is airspace, the right to use the airspace that is there at the top of that building. So yes, there is value in that. It might only be a couple of inches that's left, but regardless, there still is value in that airspace. Number three says the legal interest in cattle on agricultural land. This one you might not be sure of because a lot of students say, well, you can have certain things included in the deal and that would be part of that property's evaluation. So we'll skip that one. We'll go to the next one. A fee simple interest in a 2-bedroom apartment. Is there value in that? Would that be something that the appraiser would value? Yes, they would. So what is our answer? It's the cattle that we would not appraise. So an appraiser doesn't come up with a value for cows. Okay? They are all about real property and all of those legal interests that are vested in that particular piece of real estate. The cows don't automatically come with that property. That's something extra. Now, if the cows were part of the deal, then you would get somebody else who's an expert in cows and cattle to do that evaluation, and then you would add that onto your valuation for all of the other things that are part of that property's value. So you put those two together. You, as the appraiser, as the real estate agent, you would not actually be the one to value those cows. So there's a cool phrase, a fun phrase that we have for this one so that you remember. You remember the phrase, if you remember from a chapter a long time ago, we talked about fixtures and chattels. And if you remember that cattle are chattel, it's nice, it rhymes, and it allows you to know that that one is a false answer choice. The subject of an appraisal is what? Is it the market value of the physical property? So yes, it is, but that's not all that it is. In the physical property, like we said, the land is part of the whole appraisal, but we have lots of other things that we're going to value as well, like the improvements that are on that property, as well as all those other legal interests. What type of ownership? Is there airspace? Is there easements? All of those things. So that one, not a complete description. A fee simple estate on a cash or cash and first mortgage basis. So you might not know what this is. Skip it. We'll move on, see if there's a better answer choice. Is it a subjective measure valued by an experienced appraiser? So that one, you might say, well, it looks pretty good. I think that might be the answer, but check number 4, just in case. Is it the value of the legal rights of ownership vested in a particular piece of real estate? So that one you think, oh, yeah, that is definitely my answer, 100%. So what's wrong with 3? It's not a subjective measure. It's based on market data. It's based on fact. And so we say it is objective, right? It's more of an objective than it is subjective. So almost true, almost good, but not quite. And this is the best description of what the subject of an appraisal is. Okay? Appraisals are about lots of different things, but this is the best description of what that phrase subject of the appraisal means. What is number 2? I don't even know. I don't know what they're talking about. If any of you know what they're talking about, then please send us an email to let us know so that we can put that into a next lesson video. Sometimes they make answers up, right? They take some weird concept from somewhere else and they add it in to make it sound official and that it might be the answer. In this case, we don't know. Okay, what are the factors that affect value? You have both long-term trends and you have short-term trends. You need to be able to remember what each of the lists are and how to keep them separated. So remember them distinctly differently. Long-term trends is about the stuff that isn't going to happen in a shorter period of time, that's going to take a little bit longer for them to take effect, and in some cases take a little bit longer for them to stop taking effect, if that is what eventually happens. So the long-term trends are about shifts in age composition. This is about a shift in the population of an area. So a good example of this is if you have a really young family, even though it might be safe for them to move into a 55-plus neighborhood, they may not want to because they want to have other children for their children to be social with and to learn those skills. So that is a trend in that area, in that specific neighborhood, that might mean that certain people would not actually want to move into that area. Number 2, government programs affecting real estate. So This one is all about the government shifts in government compositions, and the supply and cost of raw materials also would affect the value of real estate. So for the government stuff, it's about those government programs. Is there, the homeowner grant? Is there an ability to get rebates on your PTT, or is there ability to offset your GST if you're buying brand new properties and you have to pay it? Supply and cost of raw materials. Why do we care about that? Well, because if we're looking at the improvements on those properties and they're special or unique, sometimes we need to use the cost in order to come up with a value for that improvement to add it to our land value. So that also affects the value of real estate, right? As those raw materials go up in price, then all of the properties will be increased in value as well, because if something happens to those buildings and we need to rebuild it, then it's going to cost us more to actually get that property rebuilt. Okay, so shifts in government institutions and regulations, sometimes that will change the tax laws as well. Like I was just mentioning, and so you can't actually take a benefit where it existed before, and now the current government has taken that option away. Short-term trends, consumer pessimism or optimism. So that is one of the things. And what is that related to? It's related to whether the consumer thinks it is a good thing or a bad thing. So a pessimistic, bad thing, or a good thing to jump into the market or to stay in the market in some situations. So it's about their willingness to enter into the market at the price that the market is dictating, right, between those buyers and sellers in those arm's length transactions. Changes in interest rates, and this is about all different investments, not just about the mortgage rates, although that is included in there, but it's about all the different investments, because the investment world is all kind of interconnected. So it's for mortgage rates, bond rates, loans rates, as well as treasury bills, interest that's payable on those things, and the Bank of Canada's monetary policy as well. So the Bank of Canada rates, which is usually what all of our mortgage rates are based on. So short term versus long term. Now, what do we say about these two? We really only care mostly about the short-term trends. And the reason why is because when we're doing these appraisals, these are the things that are going to affect us right now, and significantly, more significantly than some of the long-term trends. The long-term trends, like I was saying before, it takes them a little bit more time before they really affect the markets, or whether they stop affecting the markets, if they're going to cool down or go away at a certain point in time. So we really don't look too much at the long-term trends. We're going to focus on those short-term trends when we're doing our evaluations and trying to figure out what is going to affect the value. Which of the following factors is most likely to affect the value of residential real property in the short run? Consumer opinions relating to residential real estate values. So remember, short run, these are the short-term trends. So yes, consumer opinions was one of them. Supply and cost of raw materials, government programs affecting real estate, and shifts in age composition of the population, all of those were on the long-term trends list. So that's why I said you need to know what each of those lists are and to be able to keep them separate for super simple questions like this one. If you get this one on your exam, you can do a little dance, a happy dance. What are some of the sort of larger, specific, the long list of things that affect the value of real estate? All of these different things. So we're going to talk about a few of these things as we go further in the lesson. But this is sort of the basic list about the property and the area itself. So the physical part of that property, so the location, topography, which is the landscape of that area, soil fertility, the climate, right? If you're looking for farmland, then you care about all of those things. Community factors, so transportation, schools, churches and parks, all of the things that you have outside of your working life, and that kind of fill in all of the activities that you would do with your family or that your family would do as their activities. The economic factors are interest rates, like we were saying, those are our short-term trends, things on the list. Unemployment rates, wage levels, price levels, and taxes. So some of the short-term and long-term trends are both in there. Political government stuff, so again, back to that long-term list. Zoning bylaws, building codes, fire regulations, public health regulations and measures, rent controls, and government housing programs. So all of these will greatly affect the value of properties, depending on what kinds of properties they are. Advertising, so how much or how little is spent on advertising that property will matter towards the value of that property. If zero is spent on marketing that property, well, then you get what offers you get. If you spend a lot of money on advertising or a decent amount, then you're going to speak to a much wider buyer audience, and you're going to get some better offers that come in. The relationship between the parties to the sale, like we said, it should be those arm's length transactions, right? Where both parties are trying to duke it out and get the best deal that they possibly can for themselves, and they don't care about the other party. If there are personal relationships involved, whether it's family or friends or long-term business partners, that kind of thing, then that's going to affect that value of the real estate, because that personal relationship will affect the negotiation between the two parties. The time that's allowed for the sale, so if you've gotten promoted and you have to move right away because you need to be in another area for your job, that will affect the value of that property, because you might be willing to sell for less if you're in a hurry because of those outside factors. The other thing is special purchaser. So a special purchaser is something that's not very common, and it is a situation where it will sometimes greatly extend the range of possible bids. What do they mean by that? It'll mean that the ceiling price for that purchaser might be a lot higher than a normal purchaser would be. So special purchaser is not just about the purchaser, even though that is what the name of it that they've given. Special purchaser is also about the property. It's about the property and that purchaser in relation to one another, what the purchaser needs from the property, their purpose behind buying it, and the specific characteristics that they need to have showing in that property for them to be interested. Okay, so if you wanted, for an example, as a special purchaser, if you wanted to buy a bigger place. So if you had a business and you wanted to expand, and you wanted to buy more property, well, you are a special purchaser because you don't want to pick up your business and move it somewhere else. You want to expand onto the business that you already have. So you're a special purchaser because you're waiting for something in that area or right beside you to come up on the market before you can quickly snap that up so that you can expand your business. So that's a great example of a special purchaser that might happen more often than some of the other examples that they'll give you in the questions and answers. Okay, so make sure that you know all those things. We're going to talk a little bit about these, sort of touch on them here and there throughout the rest of the lesson. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for that, for when they pop up. So an appraiser has been asked to provide an estimate of the market value of a farmhouse and the surrounding property. Which one of the following would not affect her estimate of market value? So farmhouse and surrounding property, that's kind of our key words there. So one of the pastures on the property has been leased for 2 years. Would that matter? Yes, it's about the property itself, so definitely that would affect value. Number 2 says the owner of the farmhouse is anxious to move and would like to sell as soon as possible. So if you're not sure about this one, which some of you might not be, you might say, well, it's the time that affects the sale. So if they're in limited amount of time to sell and move, then that would affect the sale. And I'm not really sure exactly because of the way it's worded. So we'll skip that one, we'll move on. The farmhouse and its surrounding property are located between the main road and the next door neighbor's property. Therefore, the neighbor gets the benefit of access to his house by means of a road that runs through the farmhouse property. So that would be an easement. It's a long description for an easement. And so yes, that would affect the property's value because you have the ability to access a property where you normally wouldn't. Number 4, ABC Finance Company recently loaned some money at a below market interest rate to the owner of a farmhouse and secured the debt with a mortgage on the farmhouse, and this mortgage is assumable. That would definitely have some value to potential buyers because if that fabulous interest rate is available through an assumable mortgage, they don't have to pay market rates that are much higher. So that definitely would affect that market value. So what does that mean? It means that number 2 is our answer choice. Why is this the answer choice? Why does this not fall under that category that we just talked about for the time that's allowed for the sale? The reason why is because it says the seller is anxious and wants to sell as soon as possible. There really is no time limit. There's no deadline for them to sell. And so we say that that isn't a factor that would affect the value. They just want to get it done, but that isn't going to make it or break it as far as accepting a lower or higher price. So hopefully that makes sense. It's a really, really tricky answer choice because they make it seem like it is related to that time allowance, but it isn't. It's just the feelings of that seller. Which of the following people would best fit the description to special purchaser as used in appraisal? So this is the example, and one example of how they're going to give you some descriptions of people, and you have to choose the one that is the best description for that special purchaser. So we read them one by one and make our decision. First one says a former Prime Minister of Canada who's interested in purchasing residential property in an upper middle class neighborhood. So there's nothing special about purchasing that type of property. Those kinds of properties are bought and sold every day, and we don't care about what they did for a living previously or currently. So the former Prime Minister of Canada, really not important to us. It just makes it sound important because it's a pretty lofty title. Okay, so let's get down to number 4, and we'll use that same sort of reasoning. Football player, professional football player. We don't care about what they do right now or what they did before. If they want to purchase an apartment to invest and have a stable income from that, again, apartments are purchased as investments every single day, lots and lots and lots. So there's nothing special about this type of purchase. So both 1 and 4 are not the description that we're looking for our special purchaser. So that means you're between 2 and 3 is your 50-50 chance. So let's deal with number 2 first. A famous Canadian painter who, in order to receive creative inspiration, feels he must purchase a little abandoned church. He is located deep in the woods. So you might think that that is a good description of a special purchaser. So let's look at number 3, and then we'll make our choice between them. A retail merchant who wants to purchase a store with a large window display along the main street in southern BC. So remember I said, you're going to look at the person, figure out why they're purchasing the property, and then see if there's specific things that they need from that property that are mentioned in the answer choice. This number 3 is definitely the best description that we have on this list of what a special purchaser is. Why? Because it's a retail merchant. So they want to purchase that property because it's for their business. And what do they need from that property when they want to put their business in there? They need it to have a large window display along a main street and in southern BC. So there are 3 specific things about that property that they say that they suggest that that the retail merchant needs from that property. So that is definitely a better description of this painter. When we look at this question, it's all about feelings. It doesn't really specifically say what is going to give the inspiration. It just says he feels he needs to purchase it. So this one is sort of vague. That one is bang on, correct for your special purchaser description. 2 neighbors, Miss Finch and Mr. Falcon, each sold their homes last week. Now, Miss Finch, she did pretty well. She sold her home for $150,000, and Mr. Falcon's house only sold for $132,000. Mr. Falcon can't understand why his house sold for less since both homes are identical in all respects. And they're asking which of the following could account for the difference in the selling price. Now, the first thing I want to take care of is that they say that both homes are identical in all respects. But we need to remember that that isn't going to happen in real life, right? We said that the nature of real estate is unique and it is heterogeneous, meaning it's not going to be the same as other properties. But they need to state that in this question so that they can ask you this. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense for them to ask you this question. So we accept that that is the case, even though we know that it doesn't happen that way in real life. So we go through answers one by one. Miss Finch had already purchased another home and needed to sell this home immediately. Now, if this were the case, we go back to that time allowed for the sale. If Miss Finch were in a hurry to sell, then she would have been willing to accept less for her home because she would have accepted, whatever the best price that she got at the soonest. And so that is not the reason. If they say Mr. Falcon had already purchased a house and needed to sell his home immediately, then yes, that would be the reason why he would be motivated to sell at a lower price than the houses were going for in that area, because he was desperate. He didn't want to have two mortgages. He just wanted to get this one sold so he could move to his new one and only have one mortgage. Number 3, we're going to take care of a little bit later on in the lesson, so don't worry about it right now. Hopefully you know that all of the above was not an answer choice, especially when they're opposite answers, right? These are really saying the opposite thing because it's got two different people in them. So hopefully you recognize that all of the above was not an option for this one. 2 identical houses located next to one another in the same neighborhood sell within 1 week of each other. So Miss Brown, she sells for $112,000, and Mr. Fisher is only able to sell for $100,000. And they're asking again, what could account for the difference in the selling price? So we'll deal with these 2 answers one by one. The listing brokerage representing Miss Brown spent an extraordinary amount of money on advertising her property. So remember that was on our list, right? Advertising, the amount that you spent, how little or how much, does matter. It will affect the value of the property because when you spend more, you have a greater audience, and so you attract more offers to that property. So that one would. Miss Brown was promoted to a new position in Edmonton, and her expertise was required immediately. So if she was in that situation, she would be desperate to sell because she wanted to sell quick, and she would probably be likely to accept a lower price for that property. All other things being equal, a selling price less than the market value of the property is most likely to be obtained in a sale when the real estate prices are increasing very quickly. So if the market is moving a lot, when you negotiate that offer, right, you negotiate that offer here, if the market is moving upward, by the time you complete, that sale price is old. It's old data, and it doesn't apply anymore because the market's moved and it's a lot higher. Okay, so the buyer's not in a hurry to sell. That it means that they're patient and they'll wait for the price that they can get, that they want to get. The buyer's in a hurry to buy. That means they're probably willing to offer more than what they should for that property. And the property's been exposed to the market for more than 2 months. A lot of times we don't. So sometimes that would make the property sell for less, and sometimes it might make the property sell for more. It just depends on what the market is doing. So you can't automatically assume it means that it's stale and it's going to get less, because it could go the opposite way as well. So we're going to talk about each one of the 4 appraisal methods now. So we're going to talk about comparative method, cost method, income method, and what we call the residual or hybrid method. So we'll talk briefly about each one for all of the licensing courses, and then a little bit later we're going to go into some more detail, and we're going to do some math with these. So the comparative method we call our direct comparison method or comparison method. This one is for residential properties typically and bare land, so empty lots. This relies on evidence from similar properties previously sold, right? Data and evidence, and it reflects the market behavior because you're using the numbers from the previously sold properties. So we use the principle of substitution for this comparative or comparison method, and this requires or it results in a minimum of subjective opinion from the appraiser. What does that mean? Because the appraiser is using that data, they're using previously solds, they aren't going to put their opinion into that appraisal because they can just use the numbers, and that will give them an accurate report. If they start to put their opinion in there, then it might skew the results. So it requires a minimum, or it results in a minimum of subjective opinion from the appraiser. The buyers and sellers are well informed about current sales transactions. You don't even need professionals to give you that information a lot of times. You can go out and find that information yourself if you hunt and you do your due diligence and look for it hard enough. So here you would go and do your search, residential MLS online. For the agent version, it's going to look a little bit different when you get your license, but you're going to search for all different things. So the comparison method would be for your residential detached, your residential attached, land only, and your multifamily. That's what would be covered under all of the comparison method, comparative method categories there. And the second one is your cost method. So the cost method is for properties where you are going to buy it and use it for yourself. This is for no income for that property, so no investment properties. So investment properties are different. Investment properties is you buy that property so somebody else can come and use it. For cost method properties, you're purchasing a property and it just has a unique structure on it that you can't value with previously sold because there's no data for it. They're unique and they're special, and there's going to be no previously sold that you can find on MLS. So this is based on replacement costs. These are going to be all special types of buildings. So pretty much any type of mill that they mention, any place of worship, so temples, church, synagogue, special types of buildings like a concrete or cement plant. Sometimes it's museums or art galleries, those kinds of things, right? Can you imagine if somebody asked you to give an evaluation of value for the Eiffel Tower? That would be very difficult for you to do because there is no previous data on the Eiffel Tower that is relevant to today, right? Yes, it was, costs and purchase and shipping and all that kind of stuff a long, long time ago, but that's not relevant to today. The third one is the income method. So this is based on your rental and commercial property. So like I said, you go buy a building or you go buy a structure for somebody else to use it. You're going to rent it, you're going to lease it out to someone else. So for this appraisal method, income method, or investment method is another thing that they use to call it. We're going to look at the rate of return. So if we go back quickly here, for appraisal method, we actually depreciate the building. So based on how long it's been there and sort of what it needs for upkeep or repairs, that kind of thing, we're going to depreciate that building. For the investment method or income method, we don't depreciate the building because for this one specifically, we look at that economical life of the building. As long as somebody's willing to come and rent it or lease it, then we're happy and we don't need to worry about what shape that building is in. So the examples for this one are warehouses, apartment buildings, leasehold interests as well. So again, remember I said you're going to have somebody come and lease that property from you. So this is typically not used for single family residences because we use that market comparison method for those types of properties. The last one is our residual or hybrid method. So this is the one that has latent value in there because it's not at its highest and best use. So this one is the one with redevelopment potential where a higher value can result by changing the use of that property, and now you get more money from it. You get more money from the sale, or you get more money from leasing it or renting it to someone. So the highest and best use is the one, the use of the land that will provide the maximum net return during the foreseeable future. So that's the official definition of highest and best use. So residual method is when you have properties like this that are in the middle of commercial areas, there is latent value, there's hidden value in that property because you can change the zoning, the use, and redevelop that property into a commercial zoning and get more money out of it. So in the context of appraisal, which of the following properties is most likely to possess latent value? So remember, redevelopment, rezoning, hidden value. 30-acre dairy farm in the agricultural land reserve. It is at its highest and best use. It's in the reserve and it's an agricultural type use. 2 says a recently constructed duplex in a single family residential area of the city. So this one you might think is one that has latent value. It doesn't, because for this one, it already has a higher use than everything else in the neighborhood. It is a duplex that is multifamily in a single family area. So it already has been elevated to its higher and better use. A bicycle store that is built on land zoned for commercial use. Again, it's at its highest and best use. It's supposed to be used for business, and that's what the bicycle store is. So that means number 4, a farmhouse situated on land zoned for commercial use. That would have that hidden potential because you could redevelop that land and get a higher and better use from it and get more money from it after you did that. Consider the following 4 properties: a pulp mill in Squamish, a single-family house in the central business district of Vancouver, multi-unit apartment complex in Burnaby, and a residential condominium in Victoria. They're asking which method would be most suitable to appraise each of these properties. So you have to say which one you would use for all 4. So let's go one by one. Pulp mill in Squamish. What method would be used for that one? We said any kind of mill would be our cost method. So once you know that it's the cost method, you can cross out answers 1 and 3 from that list because cost is the only one that's listed for the first option A there. B, a small single-family house in the central business district of Vancouver. So for that one, hopefully you recognize that there is latent value there because it's a single-family house in a business area. So once we know that, then we can get rid of answer 2 and we know that answer number 4 is our correct answer. Now, if you were sort of upside down world backwards person and you wanted to start with D first, then you could go and look there and you would see that the only option that gives you market comparison, because that's what you would use for one condo in Victoria, would be your market comparison method. That's the only one that has that listed in answer D. So you might be able to get to the answer more quickly. I would prefer that you go through all 4 to check them all just to make sure that you haven't missed anything or misread anything.